Later on in this afternoon session, workshop session number 1, Crystal Weston is going to be going more into depth into some of these strategies. But with Prop 187 and with the so-called Civil Rights Initiative, we are in the fight for our lives. Whether we win this next initiative or whether we lose, or how it is that we struggle, is going to determine the course of the rest of our lives. Whether we spend our futures trying to recover what we've lost, or whether we're able to make more advances that we need to make in order to make this a truly just society for all people of color, lesbians and gays, women. We are in grave danger of losing this crucial fight. President Clinton, our so-called Democratic president, came this close to coming out in favor of the so-called Civil Rights Initiative in his State of the Union address last January. It was only the efforts of people like Willie Brown and civil rights organizations throughout the country that held him back. And when Clinton came to California 2 weeks ago, he didn't want to talk about the issue of affirmative action. It was grassroots support, talking with the delegates, passing out leaflets, passing out buttons, passing out stickers that forced Clinton to address the issue. And we did our work so well at the grassroots that the delegates at the convention adopted not the platform on affirmative action that the President of the U.S. asked them to, but they adopted a stand on affirmative action that the grassroots asked them to. Now that's a real important lesson there. It's a lesson that if you do your organizing right, if you talk with enough people at the grassroots, if you have enough time, you have a chance, if you're visible enough, of winning your fight. And students can play a key role in this victory. It's important that students from all the campuses are here today, over a year before this initiative is expected on the ballot. Social change happens when we set the campuses on fire, and then when students take that fire from the campuses and organize not only the campuses, but also go out to the communities. It's a real important lesson. Whether it was the civil rights movement of the 1960s or the anti-war movement, it was very important to set the campuses on fire, but then it was also crucial to go out into the communities and ask for help. And I want to talk about one strategy of how we build a winning base so that we can win the civil rights fight of our lives, and we can win all the other fights that we need to go on and wage in this state and in this country. We lost Proposition 187 by only a very small vote, actually. We only lost it 59% to 41%. And it's going to be not easy, but it's possible to shift 10% of the vote to a 51% majority for us. There are a number of ways we can do it. Here's one possible way of doing it. One possible way of doing it is increasing the number of votes in our communities of people of color through registration and getting out the vote. We have to win our vote in the Latino and Asian communities. Also, the African American community is key. African Americans voted against Proposition 187 by 53%. And we can expect a much higher vote against the so-called Civil Rights Initiative. And that differential, combined with an increase in the African American voter turnout, can probably give us another 2% of the statewide vote. If we increase the registration in Latino and Asian American communities and win that vote, that can give us another 2%. And then we win the rest of our victory by moving a portion of the white vote to our side. And this is probably going to require convincing white women to vote for affirmative action by appealing at a fundamental emotional level to what they already know, that women have a long way to go to achieve true equality. We can't be afraid of a gender gap. Bettinas talked about how it is that we're at war about California's identity. California's population is only 53% white, but the electorate is 81% white. And whether we like it or not, the right wing is placing this so-called civil rights initiative on the ballot to exploit the racial anxiety of white voters. And it's also quite possible that the fundamentalist Christian part of the right wing is primarily concerned with getting women out of the workforce and back to the kitchen. And they're perfectly willing to exploit white racial anxiety if it will help them to win. What we need to do in order for us to win, for our futures, is to turn the initiative campaign into a crusade for race and gender justice in communities of people of color and among traditional white progressives. Our people must feel that they are part of something big and exciting, a resurgent civil rights movement. And that means we need to get together and seize the momentum and give people something concrete that they can do, a way of showing their support for affirmative action, a way of being able to talk with their neighbors and friends and family about affirmative action, a way of being able, as we did at the California Democratic Convention, of putting support for affirmative action out there. That this is something that when you talk about taking away, you're talking about taking away from me and my family and my community and my friends and people who care about this issue. We need a big, visible show of support for civil rights and affirmative action. And so what we propose to do is this. We propose that starting next month, we initiate a campaign to collect 1 million signatures of Californians who support affirmative action by November of 1995, a full year ahead of the election. And this 6-month campaign is going to be the biggest, we hope, grassroots campaign that this state has ever seen for affirmative action, for civil rights. It'll give us the chance to go neighborhood by neighborhood, store by store, parking lot by parking lot, classroom by classroom, and ask people to take a stand in support of educational opportunity and affirmative action. If they're with us, we'll have the chance to get their name and address and phone number a full year ahead of the election. We'll ask them to become involved in the campaign. We'll ask them to post signs in their windows, bumper stickers on their cars, wear buttons, and put messages on their answering machines, urging everyone to show their support for affirmative action. The campaign has a whole number of goals. It's going to build the kind of organized movement it will take to deliver a vote that we need, and a database of 1 million potential voters, contributors, and volunteers, so that we can win this fight of our life and all the other fights that are going to come. We need also to build the infrastructure, the campus by campus, community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, workplace by workplace network that it's going to take to win this fight for affirmative action and the next fight for civil rights, and so that we can go on the offensive again in our lifetimes, instead of building always and asking to recover what once was lost. The campaign does not stop there. In December of 1995, we can start our election field operation. And this is where we can really start to get serious about voter registration. We can start to do educational house meetings. We can do debates of all kinds. And then in August of 1996, we can make sure that we've got the kind of grassroots effort in every city and every neighborhood in this state. It's this scale of things that we need to talk about in order to win not only this initiative, but the rest of the initiative. I don't know about you, I'm getting tired of losing these initiatives. I'm getting tired of being on the defensive. I want to go on the offensive. And what it takes in order to go on the offensive and spend the rest of our lives organizing for new things instead of defending what another generation has already won for us, is it takes long, hard work. It takes going out there, and it takes talking with people in supermarkets. It takes talking with people door to door. It takes asking students to give up their summer vacation to spend it fighting for civil rights, fighting for affirmative action. And it's going to take a big organized effort, because this is a big organized state. And we aren't necessarily going to have the kind of money that these campaigns are usually won with. They're usually won or lost on very narrow measures of TV ads or radio ads. People usually don't debate the issues on initiatives. This one is different. People feel very strongly about affirmative action, and we are going to have to engage every Californian about the issue of affirmative action. We are proposing that we do that from a base of strength, from 1 million Californians being out there and saying, a full year before the election, we are in support of affirmative action. If you're interested in these ideas, and we hope that students from throughout the state will come on board, again, Crystal will be talking about these ideas more in workshop session 1 on legal analysts, legislative strategies, and CCRI, and I urge you to attend. And those of you at different campuses interested in plugging in, please talk with Crystal. And we urge also the group as a whole to please join into this battle, because students going into the community to talk and organize and ask for help is a powerful force, and a force for change, and a force for moving us ahead. Thank you.
Next we have Professor Carlos Munoz. Between himself and Pedro, they have been the most consistent people here supporting the coalition effort and working with the UC Berkeley Affirmative Action Coalition in many events. So, Professor Carlos Munoz.
Buenas tardes. It's nice to see so many of us here today that have been working for a long time in the struggle since the 1960s, of course, I'm talking about, not just recently. But also there's a lot of empty chairs, as we can see around us. That means that we have a very, very tough fight ahead of us. Because we're not just fighting Pete Wilson, Newt Gingrich, and otros pendejos, or other ilk. We're also fighting liberals on this issue. That's right. I was somewhat privileged to be at the Goldman Foundation Environmental Awards in San Francisco last week. If you don't know what that means, or what that is, it's a very progressive, white, progressive foundation that gives $75,000 award to grassroots community activists throughout the world that are making a difference from each continent of the world. This year, the North American award went to a Chicana, an 81-year-old Mexican-American woman from East Los Angeles. It also went to a Nigerian freedom fighter who right now, this very minute, is being tortured in the prisons of Nigeria by the military dictatorship. And I said to myself, it's wonderful to be here because it gives me that inspiration that I need to keep going, as I have been doing for the last 30 years of my life. But I talked to one person who sat next to me during the whole time, and he was telling me about his critique of Republicans and other people like that. But then I posed the issue of 187, the issue of affirmative action to him. And his response was as follows. Those damn immigrants, they're a problem. People of color, they want it all. And they don't even have the intelligence that prepares them for the kind of jobs they want. Cabrón. I said, yeah, that's what we're up against. You know. We're also up against another force that we didn't have to fight in the 60s, our own kind. Uncle Thomas on the Supreme Court is the most, visible one in some ways. But we also have people like Tom Sowell, although he was kind of around in the 60s, he hasn't become quite the celebrity he is now, thanks to that Hoover Institute down the road, that penis-looking institute, thing that goes up the tower, mantle of white male supremacy. But he was also has been joined now by the likes of Linda Chavez, a Chicana from New Mexico, former member of the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party, who is now, or became one of the Reagan's tokens in his cabinet. We're also joined by others like the guy down in San Jose State who, has a book out, the character of our, quoting Dr. King, Shelby Steele. And I just debated one black male recently on the issue of affirmative action who is a Republican in Sacramento who works with the legislative lobby there for Sacramento Republicans. And as I was debating him, I was tripping out on it. I said, my God, I didn't do this back in the 60s, having to debate a man of color about the issue that represents the struggle that we have been fighting for a long time. So we're up against it. We're up against it, which means that we cannot win the struggle unless we commit ourselves twice as much as my generation, committed itself back in the 60s. Because, as Angie has put it most eloquently, we're fighting for our lives this time. We were then, yes, too, but now we really, really are. The Civil Rights Initiative has to become the major issue, in my mind, not affirmative action. And now it sounds kind of contradictory, perhaps, because I'm one of those, as Hatem has mentioned, very actively involved on the issue of affirmative action, and I will continue to do so. But see, affirmative action is just one small part of a very large and larger struggle. The Civil Rights Initiative, and I debated Custer the other day. I was supposed to debate the Black Regent, ¿cómo se llama? Ward Connerly, but he canceled out on me. So they sent to Custer instead. And he said very simply, I'm not against affirmative action. I'm just against race. I'm using race as a category, blah, blah. But then on the Rush Limbaugh show, he stated very clearly that the reason he thought of the CCRI was because he got sick and tired of seeing all the radicals of the 60s taking over the faculties of these institutions, the deanships, and seeing simultaneously the lowering of standards brought about by the cultural diversity of his campus. Ahí está la cosa. That's where it is, right there. The bottom line. The CCRI, anti-affirmative action, the anti-immigrant hysteria, 3 strikes you're out, are part and parcel of the right-wing counter-revolution that started with Reagan's presidency and continues today with Newt Gingrich's revolution in the Congress. We must keep that in mind as we organize and debate affirmative action. We need to put it in that larger context. We are in a very, very intense race and class and gender war in our society right this very second. We have our backs against the wall because, in fact, we don't control these institutions. We don't control a damn thing in this American empire of imperialism and racism and white male patriarchy and homophobia y toda esa cosa. That's why we must fight as we have never fought before. We must put once again our lives on the line, not just the slots in affirmative action at this institution, but our lives on the line, because that is what it has come to in this day and age as we get ready to enter the 21st century. We're not playing games. We're not marching out in the streets anymore just for the hell of We must not only demand what little we have in affirmative action, but we must demand something more beyond that. We must demand the fundamental restructuring of these institutions that will guarantee not only affirmative action slots, in quote, but very true equal opportunity for all people, including poor whites, including everyone that has been left out, not just us, people of color. We must organize as we are fighting CCRI, as we're fighting all these efforts on the campus and off campus. We must begin to organize a new civil rights movement, but not the old version, the 60s variety. That was a male-dominated movement. It was a black and white struggle, largely. We must organize a civil rights movement that is truly a multiracial, multicultural movement and struggle. We must also, as we are organizing, begin to educate our own kind, our own communities, about homophobia, about other issues that are not quite legit to talk about. You know what I'm saying? Especially in my own community, the Latino community, that's very, very much of a struggle. But we have to tell these machos out there that, hey man, the world is larger than just, you know, the male pendejada, end quote. What I mean by that is the male, you know, stupidity that we have all around us that makes for the reality of battered women, that makes for the reality of rape in society. We must put a stop to that, as well as we will have to stop other things in our society. I can go on and on and on, but we have a wonderful set of speakers here. And I just want to say in conclusion that those of us here at this institution don't have the luxury that we never really had to simply be professors writing books for other professors, okay? Or simply be students concerned about getting that BA and certification necessary to make it, to become a success in the mainstream. We must go out of our way as we teach, as we learn, to put ideas into practice, to put into practice a counter-hegemonic politics in society that goes beyond Democrat and Republican, because we don't know it by now, we'll never know it, that the Democrats are gone. Okay, they're gone, forget them. With all due respect to Willie, I didn't get a chance to hear him, okay? And I respect the man, he's done a hell of a lot. But the Democratic Party ain't gonna do a damn thing. They wanna win the next election. They're talking about the poor white middle class. They're talking about getting that white male angry voter back. The hell with that. Let them have those people, okay? Let us begin to act out a new vision of an American politics without borders, sin fronteras. An American politics that goes beyond the U.S. and connects America Latina, that connects Africa, that connects Asia, that connects all the people of the world together, because we are one in the final analysis. We must fight on that basis. Mother Earth deserves our loyalty, and she's the only one who deserves it. Muchas gracias. Venceremos. ¡Que viva la revolución!
Next, we have a person that is not a stranger to UC Berkeley, been part of the free speech movement here in Berkeley, one of its leaders, and currently is also active as part of Campus Coalition for Human Rights and Social Justice, which is a coalition that is trying to connect faculty from the CSU, UC system, as well as with students to begin organizing for human rights and social justice on campuses. So, Mario Savio.
Seems like I'm the only European representing our part, our continent. Okay. But we'll need more of it. I'd like to indicate something about how I got to be here. In other words, what the dues are I paid to get on the panel. It's important not for my benefit, but in terms of our understanding where we've been and where we may need to be again. Across the bay in San Francisco, my first arrest, there weren't a lot of them. I mean, there were people who were into collecting this, like, collecting coup. I just was arrested a few times. The first time was at the Sheraton Palace Hotel, and we called it then in those days, quaintly now, discriminatory hiring practices. Now, we didn't have the idea that you had to prove that the particular person who was seeking a job had actually himself been noticed sufficiently to be discriminated against. It was sufficient to take a look at who was working there. You look at the front desk, if all the faces were white, discriminatory hiring practices. It was pretty clear to us. And so there were demonstrations. Those were, let me say, it was a massive campaign. And we shut down the hotel. Okay? I say we. I was a warm body. There was Tracy Sims, there was Mike Myerson, was it? I was a warm body. I was one of the people arrested. But there seemed to be no other way to do it. In those days, there was no institutionalization of affirmative action. Okay? That demonstration and many others like it was about affirmative action before it became such a major institutionalized program that now all the dominant people in the society are quaking in their boots because they're about to be thrust from the scene. We've been so successful. But in those days, we call it discriminatory hiring practices. We did shut the hotel down. It was actually glorious. I remember that I got there, of course, because I believed in the issues, and in part also because there was this girl I wanted to impress. That was one of the things people did at a certain age and still do. Let me say we had in those days there were coffee dates, there were library dates, study dates. Well, there were picket line dates. Okay? Now I know that you do some of that today. Let me say, invoking a dead European male, okay? That is a tradition more honored in the observance. We ought to do more of it, in other words, okay? So please encourage your partner of whatever sort to join you on a picket line. It is definitely a tradition honored in the observance. Okay, I'm not going to ask you who I'm referring to. Okay. Now let me say something about the pattern. It started then in the streets. All right? Streets, broadly speaking, because we marched right into the hotel. There was no using that hotel, okay? It started in the streets. It went to the courts. It did. Some of us won, some of us lost. After a passage of many years, it's now an initiative. It is an initiative which really, it's a pity that George Orwell didn't live to see this, okay? This is Newspeak, okay? This is the California Civil Rights Initiative, all right, CCRI. You really do have to keep that in mind. If at some point you lose sight of the issues, if at some point you don't feel outrage, not rage, but if you don't feel outraged, think of the name. Think of the name alone. The name is a lie. Problem is, if that initiative, that anti-civil rights initiative, passes, we'll be back to the streets. I remember how, okay, I know how to go limp. I know how to allow them to carry me away, how to impede the arrest procedure so that it takes as long as possible. My children are sufficiently along that I'm willing to do it again. I'm not eager to do it again. But if that's what it takes, that's what we'll have to do. And I say this as much for people outside this room who may read about it as for the people here. People have to understand what Pandora's box they are opening, how divisive this particular initiative is. All the graybeards are going to come back, and they're going to be joining hands with lots of younger people. It's going to be in the streets if we don't win at the ballot box. Guaranteed. I promise you. Guaranteed. Okay. It's not just affirmative action, significant as that is, and I want to say a good deal more about that. It's a whole range of issues. It's in fact a whole alternative way of seeing the world, as some of the signs I've seen in Berkeley so eloquently put it. It's newt-wit, okay? Now the problem is, they can get people to vote their way on the basis of prejudice alone, on the basis of fear alone. The people who voted in this terrible set of propositions were mostly not bad people. They were people who were confused. They were confused by others who knew better, who had the advantage of money, and who propagandized it was a soundbite election. And they can do that again. They have the money. They can do that again. I repeat, if they succeed, then we will be strong in the streets. If we can't be strong at the ballot box, we will be strong in the streets. Let me say now a few things about just a couple of things, and we'll come back. I like to wander around things, see them from different points of view. A few things about affirmative action, broadly speaking. As an institution, it is perhaps one generation old. I grant you, affirmative action policies are much older than that. What you've heard from previous speakers, what Willie Brown says, absolutely true. But as an established institution that everyone has to contend with every time, mind you, people submit applications for work, it's very much an institution, in that sense, only about a generation old. Now, ancestors from my continent established a special kind of racial and gender supremacy here that we've known and loved 300 years ago. Can one reasonably expect to have undone that in one generation? 30 years against 300? You see, you don't need a lot of facts. It's so preposterous